Hello everyone, Dr. Eames here. I'd like to talk to you this time about the three sectors of activity. This is a perfect starting point for an introductory course like this into business because it really gives us a place to start and a different way maybe to think about the things that we do, whether it's economically and so forth, in a way to put things in perspective. So basically, the notion is that we do have three sectors of human activity. Sometimes it's called economic activity and a variety of labels, but really we're talking about the private sector, the public sector, and the nonprofit sector. Each of these are completely different in many ways, yet if you're going to be a manager in business, for instance, you would pretty much take the same approach when it comes to working with people and getting things done and organizing. So there is a lot of overlap, even though each of the sectors is unique in its own way. So I'd just like to make a few comments about each of the three sectors. First of all, the private sector. Well, certainly the private sector is about making profit. This is where business and enterprise and commerce takes place. But it's more than that also, because there are many ways of going about doing business, many sorts of different systems and so forth. But at the very most basic thinking about the private sector, it's about responding to what the public wants and what the public needs. So the central purpose here is to make money, and so we're talking about companies of all types, from huge mega corporations to small one or two person operations and so forth. All of that is in the private sector. Now the public sector is really about government, and it means if you work in the public sector, you work for government in some way. And this is a pretty wide area when you think about it. We're talking about the federal, the state, and local governments. So working in the public sector can be incredibly varied, and your environment is going to be different depending on where you go in that public sector. If you choose the federal level, you may work in some government agency of some type. You may even be subject to oversight by a political appointee. And then you would be working in a very different atmosphere, say if you were working in a city clerk office or something like that in a city, or at a county level, or even at the state level. So the public sector is about just that, serving the public, doing something and having some job that really relates to the public in some way. And then finally we have the nonprofit sector. Now, the nonprofit sector is really different than the other two sectors because it isn't a mission of making money or profit. It is about serving the public, but in a sort of a different sense, because it's about a mission of caring generally. Those who work in the nonprofit sector generally are following some idea that they've got, that they think they want to accomplish something, to give something back, to help some group. And there would be all types of ways that we could do that, and in so many different areas. So these organizations that operate in the nonprofit sector fill a need that the government, the public sector really can't fill, and that the private sector is not inclined to fill most of the time. Generally, businesses in the private sector assume that we're here to make money. We're not necessarily here to prop up society. Although you will see that some large corporations in particular do respond to public pressure, and public pressure these days says you should give something back. If you're going to get rich and make a lot of money in America, we'd like you to give something back. And even at its smallest amount, it generally means having some influence over their operations at the local level maybe. For instance, Walmart in their giant big box store is not necessarily welcome everywhere. And particularly in states like New York and California and so forth, they want, depending on the neighborhood, something different. They want Walmart to be a little more flexible. And Walmart will respond because they want to get into these markets, obviously, and so forth. So the private sector does respond somewhat to those areas that aren't necessarily about making profit. but being green and giving back to the community, like say McDonald's does with Ronald McDonald House, where they pay the bills for families that have generally children or something like that who have a really debilitating disease and they simply can't afford it. And it's a place for them to go, like a hospice house, and stay together while the treatment is happening and all of that. So there's a little bit of overlap here. And we should remember that if you are going to be, say, a manager in business or an owner, that certainly the things that you do are going to differ depending on the sector you're in. But if you're a manager, you may be taking the same approach. You have to motivate people, you have to organize them, and you have to control things by gathering information. And so you would do those sorts of things in all three sectors. All right, that's all I have for this time. I'll talk to you again soon.